Shalom Aleichem Rabotai, a Gudvach, a Shvua Tov, a Chodesh Tov. It is the last day of Nisan, the 15th day of the Omer, and the first day of Rosh Chodesh. And God willing, today we are finishing the Kilayim in the Mishnah Yomi. Tomorrow we start Shvi'it in the Mishnah Yomi. We do have free pocket-sized Mishnayos available in the front of Suburban Orthodox in Baltimore. Please feel free to come and take. We are in the 9th parak of Kilayim at the 9th Mishnah. Levodim asurim. Levodim is felts. Felts that here are pressed together with wool and linen fibers pressed into a felt. V'neishem shu'im. Because they are shu'ah, they are smoothed together into a felt. Recall yesterday we said shatnez. This weird word shatnez is an acronym, Shua Tavui Venuz, which means really smoothed out, combed out, or spun, or woven. Now, there's a machlokas rishonim, we said yesterday, if it's and or. If there's an isser deraisa, if you do any of these things together, or you need to do all of them together, or as the Taisus explains, you need to process the raw woolen linen into fibers and then into threads, and then weave it together to get the isser deraisa of shatnez. So the rishonim differ in how exactly to understand what the implication of shatnez, shuat v'vanuz really means, but here we're saying it's usser, and perhaps only usser derabanan, because they're merely smoothed together out of raw fibers into a felt, not spun, not smoothed into fibers and made into strings and then woven. Mishnah continues, Piv shel tzamer b'shel pishtan usser, a border made of wool that's being used as a border around a fabric of pishtan. So you made something out of pishtan and you don't want the edges to come unraveled, so you add a border onto it that's made of wool. That's usser as shatnez. You cannot wear this. It surrounds around the weaving. So this border is going around the edges of the woven linen, and it basically retains its strength and becomes part of it. So even if it's not literally sewn onto the linen, but it's being used as a border pressed around the linen, it would be usser. It combines as kilayim. Yosi Omer, Meshichot shel argaman asurot. These belts made of purple wool. Argaman, recall, is one of the types of fabric used for the Big Day Kahuna, and it was made of dyed purple wool. It was dyed in the wool there. Molel od shelo kosher. Why? Because when someone's making such a baguette, it's like a bathrobe or some kind of robe, some kind of cloak, and this meshicha is the belt around the cloak or around the bathrobe. And when he puts the belt in, he is molel, he bastes it, so he puts a little stitch there to keep the belt attached to the robe. You'll see this, some bathrobes have like a shtickle belt loops, but in the back they have a stitch where the belt of the bathrobe is stitched onto the robe. So that's the same idea here. So a belt of argaman, of purple wool, since it's wool, it can't go on a robe of linen, since it does typically get attached to it in some fashion. Since the belt's attached, it's kind of one garment together, and it's shatnez. There's an interesting halacha, kind of halacha lamaisa here. The Shulchan Aruch in Yoredei Shin, halacha dalet, says motor libosh chaluk shel tzemer al gabe chaluk shel pishtan. Ul kashram yachad afal pisha eino yachol lefoshton blo hatar kesher. He says, so you could wear one chaluk is like a robe or a shirt that's of linen and one of wool, even though there's a tie, even though like you button the suit, for example. For example, he's talking about a case of wearing a shirt of linen and a suit jacket of wool. Even if you button the suit jacket or you've tied it closed somehow, you could still wear this, even though you'd have to untie it to get out the linen garment. Or similarly, if you had a talis katan, your talit was wool, and you're wearing that underneath your shirt of linen, and then you button the shirt closed, you have to unbutton the shirt to kind of pull out the tzitzit, perhaps. So he says it would be mutter to wear two garments at the same time, but the Ramah disagrees, and he says, for instance, you can't wear two pants. Like you couldn't wear long johns that are wool and then linen pants that are linen, because you can't take off the outer one without taking off the inner one. But two chalukim, two cloaks, maybe you could take off the inner one without the outer one, and it wouldn't be an issue. So this Mishnah with the belt reminds us of that. If it kind of becomes one garment, it's an issue because you can't really take off one without the other. So Maisa, it's a machlokis mechaber Ramah about, for instance, wearing a shirt underneath a jacket, and one's wool and one's linen. Well, if you could take off the inner one without the outer one, the Ramah would say that's okay. The Shulchan Aruch says even if you couldn't, it's still okay. The Mishnah continues, Lo yikshor seret shel tzemer b'shel pishtan. He shouldn't tie a strip of wool to a strip of linen. This is again on his belt, lach gorbo, to tie his belt closed. Et motnav, to tie around his waist and make it a belt. Afal pi shirtzua be'emsa, even though there's a leather strip in the middle. So they say even if you have like a leather belt, and the way he buckles the belt is there's a little bit of wool and linen on the ends, and he ties the wool to the linen. By tying it closed, he's making a shatnez. Mishnah Yud, the last Mishnah, Mazel Tov, Otot Hagordin, the letters of the weavers, Otot Hakovsin, and letters of the launderers. These are like dry cleaning tags. So they might be sewing a letter or a sign. Ot can be a sign, it can be a letter, into the garment to identify whose dry cleaning it is or whose suit they're sewing or weaving or something like this. It's like a siman to identify who's whose, and they might sew using pishtan or tzemer in the opposite min. This is asuros b'shum kilayim. So you couldn't wear this until you ripped out those identification marks. We've talked about on Shabbos, it seems typically dry cleaning tags could be considered batel to the suit. So they could be taken out on Shabbos, but sometimes they're not batel if someone's makbid. There's a discussion there in Hilchos Shabbos about removing dry cleaning tags before taking the suit into Rishus Rabim. Mishnah continues, if somebody combines wool and linen with one stitch, so the needle goes into the wool and then into the linen, and then he's done. That's just one stitch. Ein bo mishim kilayim. It's eino chiber. Ein bo mishim kilayim. It's not a real attachment. He's just put a string through two distinct items, and it's just with one stitch, one in, one out. It's not considered kilayim. Hashom to b'Shabbos potter. Somebody who rips out such a stitch on Shabbos, it's just a single stitch, or it's sometimes called a half stitch. He's potter. He hasn't really done anything because they weren't really legally combined. Asa shnei rosheha letzad echad. If he puts both ends to one side, so what he's done is he stuck the needle into the tzemer, and then out of the tzemer into the pishtan, and then out of the pishtan, and then turns it around and goes back through the pishtan, and then through that, and then back through the tzemer. So then the needle and thread is coming out the side it originally came in. So this is a chibor. This is called two stitches, or a full stitch. V'yesh ba mishum kilayim. There is kilayim here. He's gone in one side, and then all the way through both materials, and then back through both materials, and out the same side he came in. This is considered a legal stitch. Hashom to b'Shabbat chayev. Somebody who rips out such a stitch or undoes it on Shabbos, he's chayev. He's legally separating. He's korea almanat litfor. He's really doing a malacha. Rabbi Yehuda mer achi sholish. You need 3 stitches. According to Rabbi Yehuda, you need to go inside A through both materials, then turn it around and come outside A after going through both materials, and then turn the needle and thread around again and go through both materials again. So you'd have what's sometimes called 3 stitches or 1.5 stitches. So Rabbi Yehuda says you need that much to make it really a chibur. V'hasak v'kupa mitzdarfin the kilayim, and something made of sock, it's like sackcloth, like a bag, and the kupa like a box. Is like some sort of box that has a linen lining or something like this. They can be mitzdarf. They can join together to make something kilayim. So he's, for instance, sewing a sack inside a box, and the box has linen as part of it, and the sack has wool as part of it, and he's combining these two kalim, these two items, even though only part of it is wool and part of it's linen, it still joins together for kilayim. So Mazel Tov Rabosai, Baruch Hashem, we've finished kilayim, and tomorrow starts Shvius. It's amazing time to learn Shvit, because it is Shvit. It is the Shemitah year right now, for a few more months even. So we will have Baruch Hashem learning about something that is halacha l'maaseh, and a very important part of the mitzvot that are taluyot on Eretz Yisrael, and a very important part of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. So we're going to be able to see some halacha l'maaseh. So Mazel Tov, and I look forward to learning with you in Shvit.